North Korean soldiers fighting against Ukraine and Russia are reportedly causing problems for the local people, including drunkenness, thefts, and attempted rapes. It's being blamed on the unusual degree of freedom that they're experiencing fighting for Russia. A message from a private chat channel for Tuvan units says, "The cultural and language barrier makes our imaginary friends and comrades from the DPRK absolutely deny military brotherhood, coherence, and army discipline." 15 cases of drunkenness in the past month, 4 fights, 2 attempts to rape civilians, and 7 thefts. There are rumors in the unit that it is not only scary to turn your back, you don't even want to give them weapons. Of course, they have strengthened our mobilization resource, but this has led to many more problems than expected, because the vaunted discipline of North Korea has evaporated at the slightest freedom of action for Korean soldiers. Officers in a Russian rifle regiment are said to be labeling men as deserters to avoid paying them, beating them, denying medical care, forcing female medics into sex, and sending men into assaults without equipment while telling them to scavenge it on the battlefield. The wives, mothers, and sisters of men serving with the Russian 54th Motorized Rifle Regiment have published an appeal to the Tsar, complaining that their husbands, sons, and fathers are subjected to illegal actions by inhuman beings endowed with power, i.e. army commanders. One of the mothers says that in the unit, soldiers are illegally labeled as deserters, even when they are still serving, to deprive them and their families of wages and compensation. They are also denied treatment when they are wounded. The fighters are not given medical care, but are handcuffed and beaten. When they leave for a combat mission, the fighters are robbed of their phones, maps, personal belongings, and then all of this is simply lost and disappears. The guys are practically not evacuated. If the guys are wounded, they crawl to the designated place, bleeding. Dead soldiers are not evacuated. If the guys are wounded, they end up in the hospital with shrapnel, with serious wounds. They are not sent home for rehabilitation. They are sent back into battle. The guys never return from there. They also say that supplies of humanitarian aid sent to the soldiers by relatives and volunteers never arrives, but is simply sold, likely by officers or corrupt logistics personnel. This is a common occurrence. The relatives say that commanders are asking for money so that servicemen do not go on combat missions. If soldiers are seen as undesirable or insubordinate, they are zeroed out or killed. According to the relatives, men are sent into assaults with little equipment and are told to scavenge what they need on the battlefield, presumably from the corpses of those who were sent before them. The relatives ask, they are sending them to a place from which it is practically impossible to return. They are sending people who are not properly trained or prepared. The question is simple. Why is all this being done? Their complaints are consistent with previous disclosures about the 54th Motorized Rifle Regiment's commanders. In September 2024, soldiers complained that they were being extorted, beaten, tied up, and liquidated by their officers. Junior officers were also violently abused, according to a series of text messages attributed to a soldier with the unit who described what was happening. The officer was handcuffed to a pole, beaten in a drunken stupor by the battalion commander and the chief of staff. They beat him so hard that a couple of ribs were broken, after which the commander shouted that he would suck his Armenian dick. According to a detailed account published on the Russian social media site VK, this battalion commander, directly with the chief of staff, do not hesitate to collect a voluntary tribute from their subordinates every month in the form of a receipt for the amount of 50,000 rubles, $618. Those who refuse to chip in, the battalion commander repeatedly sent to positions where it is simply unrealistic to survive. In other words, zeroing out the unwanted. In addition, the unit actively and cynically carries out forgery of combat order documents, which, if desired, can be bought from the battalion commander for 40,000 rubles, $495, and leave the unit for an indefinite period, sale of humanitarian aid, etc. According to a text message reportedly from a soldier in the unit, a medic girl was sent away because she didn't give sex to the battalion commander, so he immediately sent her to zeroing. That poor thing sat in the trench, hid from the attacks, shook, and then walked back on foot through the minefield. She miraculously survived. T was also reported recently that the regiment has a unit made up entirely of former prisoners, which is responsible for tracking down and returning deserters, evidently with some degree of force. Ukrainian forces and civilians are building a new defense line in Donetsk region. The General Staff reports a continuous system of anti-tank ditches, dragon's teeth, and wire barriers. Maintaining strong defense lines in the Donetsk region is absolutely vital for Ukraine's survival and success. Donetsk isn't just any territory. It's a strategic gateway to the heart of the Donbass and a key industrial hub. Holding these lines prevents Russian forces from breaking through and pushing deeper into Ukrainian territory. Every fortified position buys time, slows enemy advances, and wears down their momentum. Solid defenses also protect civilian populations and critical infrastructure, limiting the humanitarian toll of the war. For Ukrainian troops, these lines serve as anchors, stable bases from which they can launch counterattacks or regroup under pressure. In a conflict defined by attrition and grinding warfare, strong defensive positions turn the tide by forcing the enemy into costly frontal assaults. This not only inflicts heavy casualties on Russian forces, but also preserves Ukraine's own fighting capability. Simply put, the Donetsk defense lines are a frontline shield. Holding them means holding Ukraine's future. After the inauguration of the new pope in Rome, Zelensky spoke to Vance and Rubio, had a productive meeting with Vice President Vance and Secretary Rubio in Rome. We discussed the Istanbul talks, where Russia showed up with a delegation lacking authority. I reaffirmed Ukraine's readiness for real diplomacy and stressed the need for a full, unconditional ceasefire, said Zelensky. Russian propagandists are discussing the best way to destroy Europe, with nuclear and missile weapons or with gas and chemical weapons. Honestly, Europe, and the liberal global elite in general, needs to be broken. It needs to be broken.
Until Europe feels that chilling cold, that grave-like breath that says, that's it.
Europe, it's doomed. Well, actually, Europe and the liberal global elite need to be broken.
Here, it needs to be broken. It's like, and by the way, so are you also finally joining the club of nuclear maniacs? I believe that there are non-nuclear means, and so to speak, not missiles. And what are there? What? Oreshnik. I'm saying non-nuclear, non-missile. And what? I'm saying non-nuclear, non-missile. But Oreshnik missile. What are you suggesting?
Gas, well, for example, chemical weapons, yes, including that. You can think of anything. You can come up with a lot of things.
Ukrainian armed forces officer has been sentenced to 10 years in prison for stealing night vision devices intended for an assault unit, the State Bureau of Investigation reported. Investigators found that the officer, who was responsible for his unit's material supplies, had access to the warehouse where the equipment was stored. In late 2024, he received night vision goggles and binoculars worth over 4.5 million hryvnias, approximate $113,000 intended for his assault company. Instead of delivering the gear to the troops, the officer attempted to sell it for personal profit, the investigators wrote. Thanks to swift operational actions, law enforcement recovered more than $102,000 worth of the stolen equipment. The Lebanon District Court found the man guilty under Criminal Code of Ukraine, Part 4 of Article 410. Seizure of weapons and ammunition by a military official with abuse of office by prior conspiracy by a group of persons under martial law, and ordered him to compensate the losses. Also, a 17-year-old boy was detained in Kyiv for allegedly planning a terrorist attack near a territorial recruitment center on behalf of Russia, the Security Service of Ukraine reported. A minor previously suspected of arson targeting military vehicles has been rearrested in Ukraine after allegedly planning a terrorist attack under the direction of a Russian FSB handler, the Security Service of Ukraine reported. Despite earlier charges, the suspect had been released from custody and placed under house arrest. According to the SBU, the teen then resumed contact with his Russian curator via messenger and expressed readiness to carry out new sabotage missions. Investigators say the young man received coordinates for a hidden cache containing a homemade explosive device based on plastic explosives. He was reportedly instructed to plant it at a military facility where it was to be remotely detonated, killing both the target and the teen himself. SBU agents detained the suspect while he was retrieving the device from the cache en route to the target. He has been charged with preparing a terrorist act. Authorities are also considering additional charges of treason. If convicted, he faces up to 12 years in prison.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you want to support Warthog Defense, please become our member and get early access to new videos, exclusive members-only videos, and become administrator in comment section. The membership link is in the description.
Every day. We had a guy last week at 6 rescues in 6 days. You know, he's doing the job every day.